The voting board just flashed the final numbers and the House of Commons erupted into absolute chaos. Keir Starmer has lost the no confidence vote and his government has collapsed in the most dramatic parliamentary session in modern British history. The margin wasn't even close. Members of his own party voted against him. The scenes inside Westminster are unlike anything witnessed in generations, with MPs shouting, opposition benches celebrating, and Starmer sitting motionless as the reality sinks in that his premiership is over. This wasn't supposed to happen. Governments don't fall like this. But the accumulated scandals, the policy failures, the broken promises, and the complete loss of authority have culminated in this historic moment. What we're about to reveal will show you exactly how a Prime Minister went from election victory to catastrophic defeat in record time. And what happens next will reshape British politics for a generation. The division bell rang at 9:47 p.m. summoning MPs from across the parliamentary estate for what everyone knew would be the most consequential vote in years. The tension in the House of Commons was suffocating as members filed through the lobbies, each person's vote determining not just the fate of one Prime Minister, but the entire direction of British governance. The public galleries were packed with journalists, political observers, and members of the public who'd queued for hours to witness history. The press gallery was standing room only, with correspondents from every major news organisation globally watching to see if a British government would actually fall on a confidence vote, something that hadn't happened since 1979 when James Callaghan's Labour government collapsed. The atmosphere was electric, with anticipation and dread depending on which side of the chamber you sat. The numbers that sealed Starmer's fate were devastating and historic. The final tally showed 326 MPs voting no confidence in the government, with only 298 voting to support it. The government needed 320 votes to survive and they fell catastrophically short. But the composition of those numbers tells an even more damning story. This wasn't just opposition parties voting against the government, which would be expected and manageable. This was a significant number of Labour MPs, estimated at around 35 to 40, who either voted against their own government or deliberately abstained, knowing that their absence would contribute to defeat. The rebellion wasn't from the usual suspects on the far left of the party. It included former ministers, respected backbenchers, and MPs from all factions who'd concluded that Starmer had to go and that bringing down the government was the only way to force the change that internal party mechanisms had failed to deliver. The moment when the result was announced by the Speaker will be replayed in documentaries and history lessons for decades. The chamber fell silent as the numbers were read out, a brief moment of disbelief before the full implications registered. Then pandemonium erupted. Opposition benches exploded in cheers and shouts of triumph. Conservative MPs were on their feet, celebrating, waving order papers and jeering at the defeated government. Reform UK's handful of MPs were jubilant, having gambled everything on forcing this vote and winning spectacularly. The Liberal Democrats, who'd agonised over whether to support the vote given the constitutional precedent it set, looked relieved that their decision to vote no confidence had been vindicated by Labour's own rebellion. And on the government benches there was shock, despair and in some cases barely concealed satisfaction from those who'd wanted Starmer gone but hadn't had the courage to rebel publicly. Starmer's reaction in that moment revealed everything about his state of mind. He sat completely still, staring straight ahead, his face drained of colour. He didn't rise to speak, didn't acknowledge the result, didn't look at the colleagues who'd just destroyed his government. His hands gripped the dispatch box edge so tightly that those nearby could see his knuckles were white. For a man who'd spent his career maintaining control and composure, the visible collapse was shocking. His allies sitting around him looked equally devastated, some visibly emotional, others angry at the rebels who'd voted against their own government. The chief whip, who'd spent days trying to hold the parliamentary party together, sat with her head in her hands, the ultimate admission that she'd failed in the most fundamental duty of her position. The immediate aftermath inside the chamber was chaotic and unprecedented. Constitutional convention dictates that a Prime Minister who loses a confidence vote must either resign immediately or request dissolution of Parliament for a general election. But Starmer didn't stand to address the House, didn't make any statement about his intentions, just sat frozen as the chamber descended into disorder. The Speaker had to suspend the sitting for 10 minutes to allow tempers to cool and to give Starmer time to consult with advisors about how to proceed. During that suspension, intense conversations happened in the corridors and anterooms around the chamber. Cabinet ministers were summoned for emergency consultations. Party officials were frantically calling Buckingham Palace to inform them of the result and seek guidance on constitutional procedures. Opposition leaders were preparing statements and planning their next moves. The walk from the Commons chamber to Downing Street that Starmer took about an hour after the vote has already become iconic imagery of political defeat. Flanked by protection officers and a small group of loyal aides, he left through the members' entrance to avoid the main media scrum, but was still caught by cameras. His expression was grim, his posture defeated, the body language of a man who'd just experienced the worst moment of his political life. The short journey to number 10 was conducted in complete silence according to those present. There was nothing to say that could change what had just happened. The political career that had seemed to have such promise, the government that had taken office with such hope just months ago, had ended in comprehensive defeat and historic humiliation. The emergency cabinet meeting that convened at 11 p.m. that night was by all accounts tense and emotional. Ministers who'd remained loyal throughout the scandals and crises felt betrayed by colleagues who'd abandoned the government in its moment of crisis. There were angry exchanges about who was responsible for the catastrophic failure, with some blaming Starmer's leadership and others blaming rebels for putting personal ambition or principle above party loyalty. The legal and constitutional advice was clear. The government had lost the confidence of Parliament and had to either resign or call an election. But the political calculation was agonising. Resigning meant potentially allowing a Conservative-led coalition to form government without an election. Calling an election meant facing voters when polls showed Labour heading for catastrophic defeat. The historical significance of this moment is impossible to overstate. Only twice before in the post-war era has a government fallen on a confidence vote. The 1979 defeat that brought down Callaghan's government led to Margaret Thatcher's election and transformed British politics for a generation. Before that, you have to go back to 1924 and Ramsay MacDonald's first Labour government to find a comparable defeat. Modern governments simply don't lose confidence votes because party discipline usually holds, and because the consequences are so severe, the MPs are extremely reluctant to vote against their own side. The fact that Labour MPs in sufficient numbers were willing to bring down their own government demonstrates the complete breakdown of party unity and the utter loss of faith in Starmer's leadership. The media reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, every news organisation had broken into regular programming with breaking news alerts. The BBC brought in constitutional experts, political historians and senior political figures to discuss the implications. Sky News had reporters stationed at Downing Street, Parliament and various party headquarters capturing reactions. International news networks picked up the story, broadcasting images of British political chaos to audiences worldwide. Social media exploded with reaction, analysis and speculation about what happens next. The hashtags related to the confidence vote and Starmer's defeat were trending globally within an hour. The speed and intensity of the media response reflected both the genuine historic significance and the dramatic nature of the collapse. The public reaction visible through social media and initial polling was complex and divided. Those who'd opposed Starmer and his government expressed satisfaction and vindication, feeling that justice had finally been served for the various scandals and failures. Those who'd supported Labour were devastated and angry, many directing their fury at the rebel MPs who'd voted against their own government. There was also a significant portion of the public who expressed concern about political stability and constitutional crisis, worried that Britain was becoming ungovernable and that the constant political chaos was damaging the country, regardless of which party was in power. The diversity of public reaction reflected the deep divisions within British society that this crisis had both revealed and exacerbated. The immediate political question facing all parties was what happens next. The Conservative opposition, having won the confidence vote, had to decide whether to try to form an alternative government or to push for immediate elections. Their leader faced difficult calculations about whether they could command a majority in the current parliament or whether they needed a fresh mandate from voters. Reform UK, having supported the confidence vote, had to decide whether to support a Conservative government or push for elections where they hoped to make significant gains. The Liberal Democrats faced similar choices about coalition participation. And within Labour, the Rebel MPs who had voted to bring down the government now had to justify their actions and plan for the leadership contest that would inevitably follow. The constitutional mechanisms that govern what happens after a government falls on a confidence vote are clear in principle but complicated in practice. The Fixed Term Parliaments Act was repealed, returning power to dissolve Parliament to the Prime Minister, but the situation is unprecedented under the restored system. Starmer could advise the King to dissolve Parliament and call elections. Alternatively, he could resign and allow the leader of the opposition to attempt to form a government that can command confidence. Or there could be a period of negotiation to see if any combination of parties can form a stable government without elections. Each option has different constitutional, political and practical implications that are being urgently debated by legal and political experts. The scale of the rebellion that brought down Starmer's government has been revealed through analysis of how individual MPs voted, and it paints a picture of a party that had completely lost faith in its leader. The rebels weren't concentrated in any single faction or region. They came from the left and the centre of the party. They represented Leave and Remain constituencies. They included long-serving MPs and those elected for the first time. The diversity of the rebellion demonstrates that opposition to Starmer had become the one thing that united disparate groups within the Parliamentary Party. Post-vote interviews with Rebel MPs show remarkably similar justifications. They cite the accumulation of scandals, the policy failures, the broken promises to voters, and the complete loss of public confidence. Many emphasised that they didn't take the decision lightly, but felt they had no choice given how badly the government was failing. The specific scandals and failures that led to this collapse had been building for months, each one eroding support and credibility. The Supreme Court ruling exposing the secret EU negotiations damaged trust fundamentally. The constitutional crisis with King Charles made the government look radical and reckless. The exposure of Starmer's Brexit betrayal destroyed his credibility with Leave voters who'd given Labour a chance. The immigration chaos triggered by Richard Tice's operation exposed progressive hypocrisy and policy failures. The economic underperformance with stagnant growth and rising costs hurting constituencies across the country. The NHS crisis continued to worsen despite promises to fix it. Each individual scandal might have been survivable, but the cumulative effect was a government that appeared incompetent, dishonest, and unable to deliver on any of its commitments. The parliamentary arithmetic that made the defeat possible is worth examining closely because it shows how narrow the government's working majority had become even before the rebellion. Labour held 345 seats after the last election, giving them a theoretical majority of 40 over all other parties combined. But several Labour MPs had already resigned the whip over various disputes, reducing the majority. Others were absent due to illness or other commitments. The opposition parties, totalling 305 MPs when all present, needed only about 20 Labour rebels to vote against the government or about 40 to abstain for the confidence vote to fail. In the event, they got significantly more than either threshold, with estimates suggesting around 35 to 40 Labour MPs actively voted no confidence and another 10 to 15 deliberately abstained. The rebellion was large enough that even perfect attendance from loyal Labour MPs couldn't have saved the government. The role of the Conservative opposition in forcing and winning this vote demonstrates political skill and strategic timing. They'd been building toward this moment for weeks, coordinating with other opposition parties, reaching out quietly to disaffected Labour MPs and waiting for the right moment to strike. The decision to call the confidence vote came after a particularly damaging Prime Minister's questions, where Starmer had appeared weak and unable to defend his government's record. Conservative strategists judged that Labour discipline was at breaking point and that enough MPs were ready to vote against their own government to make victory possible. It was a gamble because losing a confidence vote that you've initiated looks politically terrible, but the Conservatives read the situation correctly and executed brilliantly. The international reaction to Britain's government collapse has been swift and concerned. Britain's allies are expressing worry about political instability in a key partner at a time when international cooperation is crucial on issues from security to economics to climate. The United States has issued carefully worded statements expressing confidence in British democratic institutions while noting the importance of stable government. European leaders are privately satisfied to see a British government that was complicating EU relations collapse. But publicly, they're expressing concern about uncertainty. Markets have reacted negatively to the political chaos, with the pound dropping and British assets being sold as investors seek stability elsewhere. The international perception of Britain as politically dysfunctional and ungovernable is being reinforced by this crisis. The leadership question within Labour is now unavoidable and urgent. Starmer cannot remain as leader after losing a confidence vote, even if he wanted to. The party's rules will require a leadership contest to be initiated immediately. The potential candidates who have been positioning themselves in the shadows are now emerging into the light, making calls to supporters, testing whether they have the numbers to win. The challenge facing any new Labour leader is enormous. They inherit a party that's just brought down its own government, a parliamentary party that's deeply divided, and opinion polls showing the public has turned decisively against Labour. Whoever emerges from the leadership contest will face the likelihood of leading the party into opposition after fresh elections, making the position less attractive to ambitious politicians who might prefer to wait for better circumstances. The policy implications of this collapse extend across every area of government activity. Legislation that was making its way through Parliament is now in limbo, with no certainty about whether it will ever become law. International negotiations that were underway have to be paused, pending clarity about who will actually be governing Britain. Civil servants who are implementing government policies now face uncertainty about whether to continue or whether new ministers will reverse direction. The machinery of government continues to function because it has to, but the political paralysis at the top creates problems throughout the system. Major decisions that require ministerial approval are being delayed, creating backlogs and problems that will take months to clear even after a new government is established. The electoral implications are being analysed by political strategists across all parties because the timing and circumstances of the next election will significantly affect the outcome. If elections are held immediately while political chaos is at its peak, Labour faces catastrophic defeat, with polls suggesting they could lose 150 or more seats. If there's a delay while a new leader establishes themselves and the immediate crisis fades from memory, Labour might recover some ground but would still face significant losses. The Conservatives are favoured to win the most seats in any near-term election. But whether they can win an outright majority or will need coalition partners depends on many factors, including Reform UK's performance and Liberal Democrats' strength in marginal constituencies. The electoral map is being redrawn in real time as this crisis unfolds. The constitutional scholars and political historians are having intense debates about the broader implications of this government collapse. Some argue it demonstrates that parliamentary democracy and accountability mechanisms still function, that MPs can still bring down governments that lose public confidence regardless of party loyalty. Others worry that the ease with which this government fell will encourage future rebellions and make stable government more difficult, creating instability that serves no one. There are questions about whether the current electoral and parliamentary system is fit for purpose in an era of fragmented party politics and social media-driven public opinion. The broader constitutional conversation that this crisis has triggered will continue long after the immediate political drama is resolved. The immediate practical challenges facing Britain are significant. Who speaks for Britain in international forums when the government has collapsed and no alternative has been formed? Who makes urgent decisions that can't wait for political resolution? Who represents the UK at scheduled meetings with other world leaders? The Constitutional Convention is that a defeated government remains in caretaker capacity until a successor is appointed, but the authority and legitimacy of a caretaker government that's just lost a confidence vote is questionable. Civil servants and officials are having to navigate unprecedented situations with limited guidance and uncertain authority. The practical dysfunction created by a political crisis has real consequences for how the country operates. The media narrative has settled into relentless coverage of every aspect of the crisis, with analysis of what went wrong, speculation about what happens next, and endless interviews with political figures offering their perspectives. The coverage is keeping the story alive and dominant in public consciousness, which benefits opposition parties who want to ensure Labour bears maximum political damage. For the defeated government and its supporters, the constant coverage is torture, each new angle and revelation reinforcing the narrative of failure and defeat. The 24-hour news cycle's demand for constant updates and new developments is being fed by a political crisis that generates endless content, creating a feedback loop that amplifies the drama and makes resolution more difficult. The timeline of Starmer's collapse from election victory to confidence vote defeat is shockingly compressed, making this one of the fastest falls from power in modern political history. He became Prime Minister just months ago after an election campaign where Labour promised competent government, economic growth, improved public services and respect for democratic norms. The first cracks appeared within weeks as economic data disappointed and policy implementations proved more difficult than anticipated. The secret EU deal scandal broke after a few months, destroying trust. The constitutional crisis with King Charles followed shortly after. The immigration chaos added to the perception of incompetence. And now, less than a year after taking office, his government has fallen. The speed of the collapse reflects both the severity of the failures and the fragility of political authority in the modern era. The personal toll on Starmer himself is visible and profound. Associates describe a man who's aged years in months, whose confidence has been shattered by the relentless crises and criticism. The weight of responsibility for governing during multiple simultaneous emergencies, combined with the knowledge that your own party has lost faith in you, creates psychological pressure that's difficult for outsiders to comprehend. The public humiliation of losing a confidence vote, of watching your own MPS vote against you, of having your authority formally rejected by Parliament is a trauma that will likely end his political career permanently. Whatever comes next for Starmer personally, he will forever be defined by this catastrophic failure rather than by whatever achievements or intentions he had. The Labour Party faces an existential crisis beyond just the immediate leadership question. The party has demonstrated that it cannot maintain discipline or unity even when in government with a clear majority. The divisions between different factions, between working class and progressive middle class constituencies, between Leave and Remain voters have proven unbridgeable under Starmer's leadership. Any successor will face the same challenges unless there's fundamental change in how the party operates and what it stands for. Some within Labour are arguing for a return to traditional working-class economic priorities. Others insist the party must remain firmly progressive on social issues. The civil war that's been brewing beneath the surface is now exploding into open conflict that will determine the party's direction for a generation. The Conservative Party's strategy going forward will determine whether they can translate this victory in Parliament into victory at elections. They've succeeded in bringing down a government, but that doesn't automatically mean the public will reward them with power. The Conservatives have their own challenges, including internal divisions over policy direction, questions about their own record in government before losing power, and competition from Reform UK for right-wing voters. Their leader is trying to project competence and readiness to govern, but they will face intense scrutiny about what they would actually do differently. The period between now and elections, however long that is, will test whether Conservatives can convince voters they deserve another chance. The Reform UK calculation is particularly interesting because they're trying to position themselves as the real opposition to failed establishment politics. They supported the confidence vote not because they wanted Conservatives back in power, but because they wanted to demonstrate that the entire political establishment has failed. Their strategy is to argue that both Labour and Conservatives are part of the same broken system and that only reform offers genuine change. Whether this message resonates with voters who are frustrated with political chaos or whether it gets drowned out by traditional two-party competition will significantly affect Britain's political future. Reform's performance in the next election could determine whether Britain continues with a two-party system or shifts toward multi-party fragmentation. The economic consequences of political instability are manifesting in ways that hurt ordinary people who have no control over Westminster drama. Business investment decisions are being delayed, pending clarity about who will govern and what policies will be pursued. International companies are reconsidering planned expansions into Britain given the political uncertainty. The currency volatility created by the crisis makes imports more expensive, contributing to inflation that's already squeezing household budgets. The government paralysis means that needed economic interventions and support programmes are delayed or cancelled. The political class in Westminster may be focused on parliamentary tactics and leadership contests, but working people are paying real economic costs for the dysfunction. The regional implications are significant because different parts of Britain are reacting very differently to this crisis.